So one underappreciated game is Daymare 1998. Pretty much a love letter to the original Resident Evil 2, this indie game focused on a lot of things we loved about the old school survival horror games. And while the game was far from perfect, I was extremely hyped for its follow-up, Daymare 1994. With that being said, overall Daymare 1994 was a solid game with a lot of different features being better than the original, as well as some features falling short compared to the original game. So I figured I would do what I do best and make a list out of it. So my name is Ruben with Nerdspace Games, and here are 4 things Daymare 1994 does better than Daymare 1998 and 4 things it does worse. Let's get it. Also, before we start today's video, since this is organized a little bit different compared to other videos I have done in the past, we are going to focus on the things that Daymare 1994 does better first, followed by the things that it does worse. So without further ado, let's get it. So let's start with the obvious one first. Because the studio has a much higher budget than they did with the original, and because the game released 4 years later, it should be no surprise that the visuals are much better in this game. From the combat with some unique abilities like the frost grip to the design choices used for the enemies as they teleport and use energy like particles to reanimate bodies, it's easy to appreciate how much this game has stepped it up. You still find yourself with weird animation choices during the cutscenes and some flickering issues at other times, but overall you'll find the experience much more appealing than you did with the original game.
There you are. While you were doing your makeup, we got the engines warmed up.
Commander, I see the Major's in a good mood.
Number 2, atmospheric horror. So if you saw my review, you would probably know that I didn't really feel this experience was a survival horror experience, unlike the one that we got with Daymare 1998, which I felt like was more of a survival horror experience. That being said, Daymare 1994 overall is probably a scarier game to most people, mainly because of the player having to navigate dark corridors constantly. That is one big aspect that I feel like adds a lot more anxiety and tension to the experience. Also with the improved sound design, so you actually hear every single sound effect going on around you, it causes you to have more intense jump scares as you're going through the facility, finding yourself shaking more times than you did in the original game. For example, something as simple as a light flickering on and off and then popping back on whenever a enemy all of a sudden appears, to you walking into a doorway and all of a sudden a monster is right there next to the entrance, down to something as simple as a breaker box just kind of bursting with sparks, will just catch you off guard so many times, and you will definitely feel that atmospheric horror more in this game than you did with the original experience. Number 3, the gameplay. So this one is probably going to be the longest one on this list, mainly because I'm combining multiple elements to this. Firstly, reloading. If you've ever played the original, then I'm sure you would know how obnoxious it was to reload your weapon in that game. You literally have to grab a magazine, load that magazine with bullets, load that specific magazine to your gun, and then you're finally good to go. The big problem with this mechanic, while being more realistic, is that it's not ideal for dealing with swarms of enemies or even the boss fights. And while it did feature a quick reload, it also came with the fact that you'll have to drop your old magazine immediately and you'll eventually need to pick it up or risk losing a valuable resource. Thankfully, not an issue at all in this game. Invader Studios realized their mistake with the original game and got rid of that feature completely, which, with faster paced gameplay thanks to the teleporting enemies and how they move a lot quicker, yeah, I think they made the right decision here. Speaking of a faster pace, another changed gameplay feature is that you no longer have to worry about a stamina meter when sprinting. Although thanks to the fact that you're not actually able to proceed to the next area until you finish off all the enemies in the specific area that you're at, you'll find yourself not needing to sprint as much anymore anyways. And then one of my favorite new weapons in this game, the liquid nitrogen base weapon, the Frost Grip. This feature allows the player to freeze enemies and then follow up with more powerful finishers. It also added an upgrade system that allowed the players to add new features to this weapon, including the ability to drop traps on the floor and even the ability to create an ice shield that deflects long-range attacks. So overall, you'll find that Daymare 1994 has much more fluent and better gameplay compared to the original Daymare.
Listen, do you think I'm scared of any of it? This place? Or a fucking court-martial? You said so yourself. All I have to go back to is an empty apartment. I can't lose you too.
Reyes. Get out of here!
Open this goddamn door!
Number 4, the story and the characters. So I would argue that regardless if you're buying Daymare 1994 Sandcastle or even the original Daymare game, you probably are not there for the story. That being said, one thing the newest entry improves upon is its story, while still having over-the-top subplots, cheesy dialogue, and even horrible voice acting. The game's story still finds itself more bearable than the original Daymare. Without diving into spoilers, you'll find subplots making more sense and a conclusion that does a fairly decent job at wrapping things up and even teases events in Daymare 1998. Also, with the exclusion of the narrator from the first game, The Cleaner, it feels like it flows much better this time around and doesn't feel as forced as the original found itself doing. Also, a big part of why the story is somewhat more interesting and bearable than the original is because of the characters. I don't think there was a single likable trait with the characters in the original. Raven felt like a stereotypical action movie jarhead, Leaf was an asshole just to be an asshole, and Samuel, while better of the three, just felt like a one-dimensional character that felt useless to the overall plot of the game. Overall, Reyes is a much likable, playable character, and her story is much more interesting to tell, and you'll find yourself being a little bit more intrigued by that story compared to Daymare's 1998. Now, with us finishing off the list of things Daymare 1994 does better, it's time to dive down into the things it actually does worse than its predecessor.
So, this is it.
Number 1, the setting. So unfortunately, when it comes to the setting, Daymare 1994 fell short. One of the biggest traits of the original game was that we got to explore different parts of a small town, a bar, an arcade, a hospital. The set design for all of these different locations, while not to the level of the Resident Evil games, was still exciting and interesting to explore. However, you'll find that this time around the setting is a little more repetitive and not as interesting to explore, mainly thanks to the lighting. Because you are in a facility that is limited on power thanks to these energy-like creatures, you find yourself in darkness a lot. Sadly, while adding to the atmospheric horror, they also create a sense of similar setting no matter where you find yourself within this facility. With the exception of a few outdoor areas and the residential area, everything else pretty much looks exactly the same. Area 51 might seem like an interesting enough location for the setting of Daymare's newest entry, but due to being stuck in one giant facility with little to no power, you'll quickly learn that it gets old real fast. So I guess I want to start by saying that just because a horror game doesn't focus on zombies doesn't immediately make it less interesting. That being said, going the route of teleporting energy particles that infect dead bodies to create teleporting zombies wasn't the right route to go. It creates a much faster paced game, which while a good action shooter, just felt out of place for a survival horror game. The game did try to create different variations by adding long range creatures and even an instant kill monster. But overall, it just all felt wrong and out of place for what the game was trying to be. Take the instant kill monsters, for example. They also had the ability to teleport as well, meaning you have to be quick with your shotgun or risk instantly being taken down in one shot. Again, it's a survival horror aesthetic with fast-paced action shooter elements, and in my opinion, it just didn't feel like the right combination of things. Number 3, less creative puzzles. So this is an interesting one because one of the biggest complaints on Daymare 1998's release is that it was full of broken mechanics, including the fact that some of the puzzles just didn't work or made little to no sense at all. Daymare 1994 improved that aspect, but also took out a key part that we all loved about the original game. While some of them were broken, a lot of them were actually interesting puzzles that forced the players to think outside of the box to solve. It wasn't afraid to make the players think carefully about how to solve each of the puzzles. Unfortunately, Daymare 1994 is missing this. In the newest entry, you'll find less puzzles, and even when you do find them, they are much more on the nose to solve. Most of which are environment puzzles that are really easy to recognize the solution to as soon as you walk up to it. The only somewhat difficult puzzles to solve in the game are the hacking devices. Outside of that, you won't find yourself thinking too hard about any sort of puzzle in Daymare 1994. Number 4, no map. So before I start talking about this one, I just want to mention that maybe I just couldn't figure out how to use the map, and I tried looking up online to see if I was missing something, because this seems like something that should have been included, but for some reason it wasn't from my understanding. But let me know if I'm wrong here, guys. I totally can admit when I'm wrong. Still, while both 1994 and 1998 follow a very linear path with its storytelling, the areas are still somewhat large to an extent, and you'll find yourself backtracking every now and then. However, one feature I think was missing from Daymare 1994 that feels like it was just sort of forgotten about during the making of the game is the map. For some strange reason, unless I couldn't figure it out, I didn't see a map feature at all. Which is strange since the original game you had a map since you found yourself backtracking in some of the chapters. Yet this time around, Daymare 1994, despite also making you backtrack, at times didn't include a map feature. Now, while I didn't feel like I needed it most of the time, thanks to the linear path you follow as a player, there were moments that, thanks to the extremely dark areas of the facility, I found myself getting lost and going around in circles trying to find my way back. The first area I think of off the top of my head is the cell block section when you're sent to go fix the ventilation system. Trying to find my way back after you have put out all the fire in the area is like being a rat in a maze trying to find the one exit. I kept doing circles by mistake and finding myself back to where I started from. Having a map feature similar to what Daymare 1998 had, while not the best map in the world, still would have made an entire process much more simple. But that's it for this episode of Nerd Space Games. If you haven't already, check out my review on Daymare 1994. Also, if you've already played both games, then how about hitting up those comments and letting me know which Daymare did you like better. Personally, I slightly give the win to Daymare 1994, mainly just because of the gameplay in this one versus the original. Anyway, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, and as always, I will see you on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.